So imagine if you're clicking on this video, you can't yet do a muscle up. So the way I'm going to approach this is to someone that can't yet do a muscle up and wants to be able to learn if they can do it or not. Well, you definitely will be able to do it. It's just going to take a little bit of time to be able to build up the strength, build up the mobility in your shoulders to be able to perform an efficient muscle up. Some people will suggest you need to be able to do X amount of pull-ups in order just to be able to perform or attempt to perform a muscle up. And this is kind of a good gauge, I suppose, for the start of the movement, but realistically it isn't going to help you to be able to do a muscle up, because the last 2/3 of the muscle up are going to require a different type of movement, and the initial part of the movement needs to be a much more explosive movement than a general pull up, because we need to build up the acceleration in order to get us above the top of the bar. An exercise that I like to recommend to people is called a crab walk. This exercise is going to be able to give you a rough idea of whereabouts you are, and also it might actually help to know whether you need to improve your mobility or whether you need to improve your strength. And the way that you perform a crab walk is if you go onto your back and you put your hands shoulder width apart behind you with your fingers facing out towards the side. You don't want them facing in front of you, and you don't want them facing behind you. You're going to put a lot of pressure on your wrists, and this isn't something that we want to do. So if you put a fingertips out to the side, and I want you to go on your feet as well and lift your hips up as high as you possibly can do, and then you start to walk with your left hand off the floor and your left foot off the floor simultaneously, and vice versa on the other side. So if you find this exercise easy and you still feel like you're nowhere near being able to do a muscle up yet, the chances are you probably don't have the strength yet to do it. As well as this exercise being a good gauge so we can see exactly where our weaknesses are in relation to being able to perform a correct muscle up, it's also going to be a good exercise to make our shoulder joints more mobile, so our mobility is going to improve in our shoulder joints, which is ultimately going to be crucial in the transition from getting yourself over the top of the bar. A muscle up is definitely a movement that you have to be very cautious about, and it requires a lot of respect because you're putting your rotator cuffs especially under a lot of pressure in the transition, so you need to thoroughly warm up before you attempt to do a muscle up. So the first exercise of the warm up I want you to be able to do is the ability test I said before. So the first exercise is going to go back to the crab walk. So once you can see exactly where you are, this is how I want you to warm up. So you can see that as the first exercise of the warm up. Another exercise you can perform to warm up before a muscle up is called a doorway stretch. And what this stretch is, if you imagine you're going between a doorway and your hands are behind your torso, you're going to stretch just that little bit of your shoulder beforehand. So you don't want to be going too aggressive on this movement, but I do want you to pulsate a little bit, and I don't want you to hold this stretch in a prolonged period of time because we don't want to be forming any muscle tears in our shoulders before we attempt to do a muscle up. So I want you to take it nice and steady, and ultimately getting those pulsations between the end of the movement and then coming straight back, and just taking your time in doing it. Make sure that you feel thoroughly comfortable before we go into doing a muscle up. So emphasising the shoulders and particularly the rotator cuff, a good exercise we can do to improve mobility and warm our bodies up is to get a practice powerlifting bar if you have the access to one of those, or just get a really light bar, and we want to do shoulder rotation. So you start in line with your hips and then you go all the way over the top with the bar, and then you're coming down to your lower back, and then you rotate back over again to your front of your body. And this is an exercise that I want you to do before you do a muscle up. All these exercises are going to warm us up, but also they're going to improve our mobility before we go into the muscle up. So if you have access to a practice weightlifting bar, that's great, but another exercise you can do if you don't requires some resistance bands. And I tend to warm up both ways, to be honest, but I'll go with the bar first and then I go with the bands after, because the bands are going to require more resistance over the whole movement. So you go in, you hook your thumbs inside the band, and then exactly the same, you start from your hips and you rotate all the way back over to your lower back again, and keep doing that. But this movement I would do after you do the bars, like I say, because it's going to require a little bit more strength throughout the whole movement, because we're engaging our shoulders throughout this exercise. Final exercise I want you to do before we go into the muscle up progression is to do some side lying rotations. What this is if you lie on your side and then you rotate a really light weight of either a dumbbell or kettlebell, whatever you prefer to do, and you want to go for the full range of motion. I find this warm-up physically prepares me for the exercises that I'm about to perform into the muscle up progression. The first tip is just to be able to do a pull-up first. Generally, it just gives you a good feel for the first bit of the movement. And if you can't yet perform a pull-up, a few exercises you can do to help build the strength in order to be able to achieve a pull-up are some lat pull downs, or another good exercise is, if you have one in your gym, are some assisted pull-up machines. The more weight you put in is going to be easier and is going to help you get higher, and these exercises are going to make us stronger in order to be able to do a pull-up. So an easy transition from a pull-up is start to make them more explosive. What I mean by this is just accelerate as quick as possible and hold at the top of the movement for just a split second, half a second or so. So you go from the bottom of the pull-up and you just pull yourself straight up to the top as quick as possible and hold for half a second before you come down. With a lot of these exercises, I don't want you to go to failure. I want you to kind of go to around 50% of what you feel like your failure is. So if you already know how many reps you can get to failure on a pull-up, I want you to go to around 50% on all of these pull-up exercises. The reason being is we don't want to exhaust ourselves before we go into doing a muscle-up. And as well, we're going to get stronger throughout time if we do less reps but more sets. So give yourself a break in between sets, and we go to around 50% of our max is kind of a good gauge to go by, I would say. So over the week, we're going to accumulate more reps than you would if you went to failure and then not being able to do any reps the following day. So the next exercise I'm going to ask you to perform is some negative muscle up reps. Now you might think, how do I do a negative rep if I can't get on top of the bar? So this is going to require you to just put a box underneath the bar, and what we're going to do, we're going to jump up, get to the top of the bar, and then you're going to go down as slow as possible in the transition of a negative rep of a muscle up. I found this exercise really helpful because it helped my mind and my body work holistically. So being able to learn a little bit of muscle memory from the muscle up and being able to do these negative reps is just going to help you ultimately feel it a little bit more, because it's going to take a little bit of technique to be able to perform a muscle up. I found this exercise to be the most helpful on this list, I'd say, so I'd highly recommend doing these negative muscle ups. So the final step that I learned to be able to do a muscle up was a few technique tweaks. So once I was doing these negative reps, I started to really feel the movement, and I found it was getting a little bit into my muscle memory. So a technique that I did when I was learning to be able to do a muscle up, there's a couple things you can do before you do a perfect form muscle up. So one thing I found really helpful was to get used to the swing. So the way I see a swing is if you can run and jump up at the bar if you find it a little bit easier, but if you get a little bit of a swing going on the bar, and then when you swing forward, you kind of bring your lats, hyperextend your lats, and then when you swing backwards, you're going to use that momentum in order to help accelerate you and come round over the top of the bar rather than just going straight up. Another way this is going to help as well is if you bring your knees to your chest on the way back before you rotate over the top of the bar. I find this just really helps again with momentum. This is something that I did when I was learning to do a muscle up before I could do a strict form muscle up, and I found this really, really helpful. So those two tips are two little hacks, I think, in order to be able to learn how to do a muscle up. Don't worry about bringing your knees and getting a little bit of a swing, because ultimately doing this exercise is going to give you more strength, and you're just going to get used to the movement of rotating over the top of the bar, because it is a very unique movement, and you'll find you'll be able to do it with less of a swing over time, and you can do it with your legs straight rather than your knees up to your chest. Come towards the end of the video with a few tips. My first tip is just to take your time. Like I said, this can be a very dangerous movement, a muscle up, because you're putting your rotator cuffs under a lot of pressure. So thoroughly warm up your shoulders, thoroughly warm up your rotator cuffs. I think it took me around 4 months to be able to learn how to do a muscle up. Last thing I wanted was to pull a muscle in my shoulder and ultimately halt in my progression. So take your time in being able to do a muscle up, perform it daily, and like I said, don't go to failure on your reps. Try and hold yourself back and do more sets if you can. So do more sets and go to around 50% as a rough gauge of what you can do to failure with your muscle up. So go to 50% and do more sets. Over the week, it's going to sum up to be more reps than you would if you went to failure, and then the next day you can't do one, for example. So I hope I've given you a few tips to be able to learn how to do a muscle up. It was a great feeling when I did my first muscle up. I've actually got my first ever muscle up on camera, so I'll put that on screen for you now. Naturally, once you can do one muscle up, you'll find your confidence grow. But another thing that I don't want you to do is, I see a few people when they learn to do muscle ups, they kind of go one arm aside and one arm aside, one arm aside, one arm aside, one arm aside, one arm aside. It's something that I used to do because you just want to get yourself above the bar, but when you go one arm, then you're putting your shoulder under a lot of pressure and you're kind of stretching it, and it's one of those movements where it can just go like that. So I recommend just trying to get a transition where you're going both shoulders over, and again, those negative reps are really going to help you build more confidence and learn the movement of rotating your shoulders over together. Don't rotate one shoulder at a time. I don't want to see anyone doing this. I think you're putting your body under a little bit too much stress. So whenever you do a muscle up, just try and focus on getting both your shoulders and both your rotations over together. I do really enjoy doing these bodyweight exercises. I find it makes you much more of a hybrid athlete, and it changes up your training a little bit, because I find just bodybuilding and weightlifting can sometimes get a little bit stagnant. You might want to try a new challenge. So something that I used to do when I was just going to the gym before I started running, I used to set myself calisthenics goals as well as kind of weight targets. So I'd be focusing on one movement at a time. So once I was focusing on that movement, I'd try and do it when I was fresh at the start of the workout before I went into my weight exercises. I hope all those exercises help you in being able to do a muscle up. Like I said, it took me around 4 months, so take your time in doing it. If you do want to learn how to do a muscle up, please do consider the exercises that I've said to you today, because I found that ultimately they helped me be able to do a muscle up. So I'm just relaying what I did, so I wouldn't ever ask you to do something that I didn't do, mate, you know what I mean? But if you've enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe, all of that stuff. I'll see you guys next time.